Hi, everybody. My name is Andrew Kalman. I am the Associate Director of Alumni Relations at Dickinson, and I just want to welcome everybody tonight. Thank you for logging on, signing in with us, and engaging with us online. We hope you are staying healthy and safe during this kind of crazy time in the world, but we're happy that we're able to still engage with you and have you here with us tonight. I want to introduce our panelists tonight. Dwight Phyall, class of 06, and he will be talking to us about wine, which I'm sure a lot of us are enjoying during this crazy time. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dwight.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Firstly, before I get started, I want to thank the college for the opportunity to be here with you all tonight. Liz and Andrea specifically for reaching out in hopes of bringing a little bit of light in some really dark times. Also Andrew for helping me out with the technical side of things. I'm truly appreciative. Secondly, I want to acknowledge all of you who are choosing to be here with me and with each other. I sincerely thank you, and I really hope that all is well with you and your loved ones. But lastly, I'd like to raise a toast, and specifically to the essential workers who are sacrificing their lives on a regular basis, day in and day out, to save others' lives. The parents who are working from home, who are raising kids, trying to get them to the next grade level, hopefully in the fall. Our educators, our delivery people, people working in the grocery stores, anybody who's making this time a little bit easier, this life a little bit easier to bear when it's undoubtedly challenging. So here's to life, not necessarily returning to normal, but hopefully a better normal, and on the other side of this crisis. So cheers, everybody sip something. So before I get into the content, just need a little disclaimer. I do have a pair of 5-year-old twins and 2 dogs. So if you hear a bark, just ignore it. It's just them telling me that they love me, okay? So please don't mind it. But the reason why I'm here is to talk about wine. It's a beverage that I love and have been into for a few years now. Want to take you back to kind of how I got started in it. And yeah, so wine for me was something that was pretty mysterious. I got into college in 2002, and in 2002, most of my experience with wine came in a box, as I'm sure most of you have, maybe even Boone's Farm, Franzia, those types of brands, Yellowtail, Barefoot, and it was with one specific purpose. Just to essentially get inebriated, get drunk, and have a party. But I started to kind of get curious about the beverage as I matured in my adult life. And I'd go into stores and I'd see all of these bottles. And I knew that wine couldn't all taste the same, although I did hear that rumor over and over again. And so I started to explore a little bit. I'd look at the bottles, I'd look at the labels, and I saw the alcoholic percentage on the label. And that was my main purpose, really. I just wanted to see how high the alcohol was in a bottle, and that's how I choose my beverage for that night. If the label looked cool, I would check it out. And if it was within my budget, and my budget was maybe $10 probably at that point, but I wanted to become a more informed consumer. And so what I did was hop on the Google machine and figure out what documentaries to watch, what books to read. And one of the documentaries that came up was a documentary called Psalm. And it was documenting a path of 4 young men who were on their paths to become master sommeliers. And the master sommelier exam is one of the hardest exams that you can possibly take. There are only about 300 master somms worldwide. And it just showed all their commitment and all the challenges to kind of become this next level, the expert in your field. And I'm somebody who's pretty competitive myself, and was studying for an exam very similar in the PMP at that time. And it sort of pushed me more and more into that wine life. And so after watching documentary, reading book after book, I started to really, really enjoy this beverage more and more. And there's a doctor, an enologist, and grape geneticist out in California who said that, wine has layers, and the layers are there if you want it. But there's no prerequisite for you to know everything about wine in order for you to enjoy it. But I will say that the more and more that I started to learn about the beverage and the grapes and the vines is the more that I enjoyed the beverage. And so a lot of your first experiences may have been, in restaurants. And you see here on this first slide where it talks about the menu of your life. Some of these menus can look like dictionaries and encyclopedias, honestly. And they're just little words on a page. And a lot of times there will be a producer, maybe a region, and a date. A vintage, which is your date, and a price. And you have to decide what kind of wine you're going to purchase for that night. And it can be somewhat intimidating. And so that was definitely one of my first experiences in wine, and I stayed away from it. But again, as we started to dive into the books and documentaries, it became easier and easier to digest. So how I started in this whole journey has now taken me to a path where I've started to blog about it. And I went to Instagram and I created this profile name called the Dapper Oenophile. And an Oenophile is somebody who studies wine, is a wine enthusiast. But Dapper comes from my initials, Dwight Alexander Phyall, DAP, and that's that whole ring there. So I do have a presence on Instagram documenting my wine journey to becoming a certified specialist in wine. So let's get into kind of the ins and outs of the grape. Wine is not a complicated beverage. And it is basically an alcoholic beverage that uses the juice of fermented grapes. And you can indeed make wine from any kind of fruit, but most typically you'll see grapes used. And specifically those grapes of the vine Vitis vinifera. Now, Vitis labrusca, which is another species of vine, those are the table grapes, the Concords that you typically eat, on a regular basis. But these grapes, Vitis vinifera grapes, are typically smaller and have bigger clusters. And so you'll see a difference between the quality of wine between Vitis vinifera and Vitis labrusca, definitely there. Now, as I mentioned before, wine and the culture around it has been stereotypically meant for rich people, kind of higher class of people, so to speak, aristocratic. A lot of times it's snooty in terms of its perception, but really it's quite opposite. And in fact, it's trending right now in culture. You'll see the differences between what we may expect of a winemaker and an actual winemaker. And this is typically what you'll see of a winemaker. They are farmers, and it's not a 9-to-5 job. It is 24/7, tending to grapes, cutting vines, getting dirty, examining soil. It's a rough job, and it takes hundreds of people to get those grapes off the vines and into your bottle at your home at night. And so, you know, when you think about the idea of a wine being expensive, typically more hands touch it. If a wine is cheaper, it's typically more mass produced, it's mechanized. You know, there are not as many people that have to handle it from vine or vineyard to bottle. So that's something that I wanted to kind of demystify there. Wine hangs out in barrels. That's where it's stored. And oak is typically the vessel for storing wines. Oak can impart flavor in wines, and we'll talk a little bit about the wines that I suggested for tasting tonight. One of them definitely uses oak, and the other one does not. And you'll see that there are certainly a variety of grapes and wines that use American oak, French oak, neutral oak. There are different combinations there. So this wine, if everyone can see, I hope, this is the Cana Albariño, and this is what we're going to be starting with drinking this evening. We typically start with white wines because white wines have higher acidity. It's the feeling of your mouth watering, the feeling of salivation that you get, and it makes you want to sip more and more and more. It's a lighter style body of wine, and so this is the Cana Albariño 2017 vintage. So the first thing I want you to do is take your glass, and some of you may have stems on your glasses and others may not. Either way, it's okay. But I want you to take your glass and just look at it. All right, just take a look. Note the color. If you're good at swirling, you can go ahead and try that. I'll teach you a little trick. If you put the wine glass, if you do have stems, or even if you don't, on a table, and with your dominant hand, you draw little O's on the table, little O's with the bottom of your hand near the foot of the glass, you'll be able to swirl. And then when you get really, really good at that, you can do it without it being on the table. And what this does is opens up the wine. You're able to get more aromatics rising to the top of the glass. We all know that when something smells good, it's more likely to taste good. Okay, and so what this does, because wine is trapped in this tight bottle, sometimes for years, the molecules kind of shrink, right? But what happens is when they're stirred up, it rises to the top of the glass and you get more flavor profiles and aromas that way. All right, so we're looking at the color right now, and we see this color is like a deep straw. There's a lot that you can tell from a color. A lot of times, you know, you can tell the age of a wine. And so if you see the color fading out in the glass to a clearer color at the rim, that's typically going to be a younger wine. So if this is a 2017, you'll see the 2018 and 2019 vintages as well. Those will typically have that clear kind of edge around the rim of the glass, even though it's a deep straw in the center. All right, so you can tell age. You can also tell viscosity. So a lot of times people refer to the little tears that come down the side of the glass as legs, okay? And we call these legs because they look like legs coming down on the side of the glass, but this is called the Marangoni effect. It's alcohol evaporating to the top of the glass, all right? And what we know is that if the tears on the glass are moving faster, I don't know if the level of detail that you can see, but if they're moving faster down the glass, we know that there's less alcohol in that wine. If there's a wine that is moving slower, the tears are moving slower down the glass, that means it's a higher alcohol wine, okay? And so that's the difference between tiers there, and that's why we talk about legs looking good or legs looking, nice. Okay, so that's sight there. There's also one more element around sight in seeing a wine that you could tell, and that is where it's from. Okay, there are some distinctive characteristics, specifically in the old world, and by old world we're talking mainly European countries, but Italian wines tend to have like a garnet or like a brick-like shade in the wine. Spanish wines can tend to have a little bit of that as well, and that's also an indicator for age. We know that white wines, as they age, they get darker, so they gain pigment. All right, so this wine, if it was stored correctly, maybe over the next 10 to 15 years, it will be a little more gold. And red wines tend to lighten after a number of years. Okay, so they'll lose color. All right, so that's sight. Now let's go to smell. All right, so we're going to get to tasting, I promise, soon. And it's okay, completely okay if you're sipping right now. That's completely fine. But what I want you to do is put your nose in the glass and take a big deep breath in, and kind of note and think about what it is that you're smelling. So in the Albariños, and this is typical of the grape, you're going to get more tropical stone-like fruits. By stone fruit, we're talking about peaches and nectarines, tropical fruits like melon, pineapple, honeydew. It's kind of secondary characteristics. We may get some white flowers like honeysuckle. On the nose here, we also kind of get a little like salinity, kind of saltiness like sea air, and that's for a very specific reason. Albariño, specifically from the Rias Baixas, northwest corner of Spain, the country. A lot of these vineyards are right up against the Atlantic Ocean, and you'll get some of that sea spray evaporating into the air, and the grapes are going to absorb some of that flavor. And so you'll get some of those aromas in the wine, and you can actually taste some of it as well. Okay, so it's almost like a seashelly type of aroma or profile. All right, so smell is very important. Typically, oak, if it's used, is going to impart more baking spices, more of like a vanilla, cinnamon, nutmeg type of profile. Here, if we take a deep breath in, we don't really smell that. So there's no oak on this wine, and that means that it's going to be stored in stainless steel versus in an oak wooden barrel. Okay, so that's what we can tell there. Now taste. All right, so as we're swirling the wine, we go through the whole thing. We look at it, right? We sniff, and we smell. What you notice, what I did there is kind of go through an aeration again. I let the wine go through my teeth, so I'm creating more oxygen in the wine and getting more of a profile. And you can see, hopefully, I know certainly if you have this wine, that it has a pretty long finish, right? And if you kind of feel the sides of your mouth, you're going to feel a little bit of like a mouth-watering type of feeling, right? You're going to, excuse me, feel like a little bit of salivation, and you're going to want to go back to that wine once again. And so that's what I talk about when it comes to acidity. Okay, so that's a profile in this grape and many white wines, but Albariño definitely is very, very aromatic, very, very acidic, and it pairs great with seafood. Right? They say what grows together goes together, and certainly if you're drinking this wine tonight, hopefully you have a side of like crab cakes. You're pairing it with a grilled fish, shrimp, anything that comes from the sea. Really, lighter dishes would be great with this. Believe it or not, feta cheese as well would be a good pairing for this. So Albariño is definitely a grape that you may not see day in and day out, but I think it's one of the more delicious wines that actually exist out there. And this producer and winemaker, Jorge Ordonez, was the first one really to export this Spanish wine to the United States. And we're talking only about 10, 11 years ago. So 2008, 2009 was when this grape was really first introduced to the States. And now you're seeing more and more American producers trying their hand at growing this grape. All right. So fireworks, right? Fireworks. When you drink this, and when you drink, hopefully any wine, that's something that you want to experience. All right. You're betting your bottom dollar that the wine that's in this bottle is going to be delicious. So there are a couple of factors that kind of influence the flavor, and we talked about some of them at a higher level a little bit ago, but I want to dive in as we go into our red wine here, the Zinfandel. So as you see on the screen now, we have soil, and for all intents and purposes, we'll call this our top soil. There are so many different soils that exist, on our earth, and specific soils influence the profile of how a vine grows. Okay, and that's going to impart a specific type of flavor in the wine as well. So if you go over to Champagne, right? Champagne is a region in France. They have chalky like soil, and they're going to be more crisp, highly acidic. And that's the type of thing that you'll see referred to as terroir. Specifically in the old world, again, in Europe, there's terroir as a sense of place. So you kind of want to experience all of these types of things in a glass when you're drinking it. We have the subsoil, right, where the roots are, that also can affect the flavor and profile of wine. We're not talking just at the top, we're talking all the way down to the bottom. What was there before, how things grow. Climate and weather. As I mentioned earlier, I put the date on the wines just for context, but every year producers, especially quality producers, will call a vintage in still wines. And that vintage indicates what went down in that specific year, just in terms of the weather and its climate. So year in and year out, a producer will bottle a wine, and that previous year or that next year, it will taste potentially different. All right. So the Albariño of 2017 may not taste the same in 2018, 2019, and 2020. All right. If there's a wet season, if there's a heat spike, if there's frost, all that affects the conditions of the grapes. And it can actually cause disease in a grape as well. And so that's why weather and climate is so important. And that's kind of where vintages come in, is that we have very, very little to do with that process. We can't control the weather. The only thing we could do is in the winemaking. And sometimes there's terrible situations that go on, and they make up for it basically in the wineries with how they treat the grapes, the fermentation process, the yeast that go in, etc. Slope, that's another kind of factor that may influence the profile of a wine. So is it a mountaintop? Right? Is it a hillside? Is it in a valley? All of these things, how the wind is hitting the vines, how the wine is set up in the vineyard, how the Albariño grape specifically are typically set up on pergolas. Sometimes you'll see in a vineyard where you can just walk and kind of pick grapes from the side, and they're set up in very specific rows. In a pergola style, they're up high. All right, and that's because there's a lot of humidity, specifically, Albariño that comes from the Spain region. There's a lot of humidity that comes in, and that can help advanced disease in the grapes as well. So they want those really, really high, those grapes and vines really, really high, so that the wind is hitting it and they're not absorbing all that humidity. So slope is another important factor in the profile of wine. And our last one is orientation. So as we know, sun helps everything grow. And depending on the orientation of where the vineyard is grown, that's also going to affect the profile of wine. So a couple of resources that I do want to provide to you in advance in order to help you kind of understand grapes a little bit more. But actually, before I do that, let's go ahead and taste this Zinfandel. This is the Bear Flag 2016 vintage. This comes from the Sonoma region of California. Most of you may be familiar with Sonoma and Napa. They border each other. But Zinfandel is a grape that's very, very misunderstood. The most popular version of Zinfandel is typically a white Zinfandel. And white Zinfandel is a different offering altogether, although it is the same exact grape. Zinfandel is also called different things in different areas of the world. So in Italy, it's called Primitivo. In Croatia, it's called Tripodrag. All right, but ultimately, it's all the same grape. You'll notice that this glass that I had for the Zinfandel is different than the glass that I had for the Albariño. And I'm trying to kind of crunch everything into this half hour here, but I want you to get a little piece of everything. So glasses actually matter as well. All right. So with a white wine glass or all-purpose glass, it's going to allow the wine to be a little bit cooler. All right, not take up as much surface area, keep it cooler, keep the temperature cooler, and concentrate those aromas in the nose. In a red wine glass, it's typically going to be a little bit wider. All right, it's going to have more surface area. You're going to be able to get your nose in it and have all those aromas kind of get in there, where temperature really doesn't matter too much with red wines, although most Americans serve white wines way too cold and red wines way too warm. But yes, as we get back into the Zinfandel, you'll see here that it's kind of a deep purple color, very, very trademark. Again, it's kind of got a little bit of glycerol on the edges, the rim's clear. So that means it's typically going to be younger. All right. But again, we're looking at.
I have a quick question too that just came in.
Sure.
The question is, because of climate change, do you think the taste of wine has changed? If so, for the better? Question.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a question that farmers, winemakers are dealing with every single day. Climate change is certainly changing the way that people farm, and they're doing more biodynamic farming and what we call creating natural wine. And so they're utilizing, the moon, the tides to figure out when is the best time to plant a vine and harvest a vine. The harvest, right, the vintage is harvested typically in the fall. Some at the top of the fall, some at the end of the fall, depending on how ripe the grape you want to be. So riper wines are going to be sweeter wines. All right, drier wines are going to be harvested a little bit earlier. So yes, that's a great question. Climate change actually does and is affecting the way that people are kind of moving in this wine space, specifically in the vineyard. Good question.
I have a few questions. Dwight, do you want me to wait till the end, or?
No, please.
All right. We had another question. What's your favorite vineyard to visit?
Yeah, one of my favorite vineyards to visit, I was actually there with a couple of my buddies from Dickinson this past Labor Day. It was Arteza, and it was, the views were just amazing. It was in Napa. and they actually did offer a few Chardonnays. I believe they did have an Albariño there, but it was just an amazing experience. I highly suggest everyone to go to Arteza if you can. Artesa. It was actually featured in a wine comedy as well on Netflix last year. I forget the name of it, but if anybody knows, please put it in the chat, and that'd be helpful. But you'll see kind of some pictures there.
I have one more question for you. Is there a correct wine for certain occasions?
No. I mean, you drink what you like, right? Typically people view champagne as a celebration type of wine, but you can have, champagne on a Tuesday if that's what you like. And I think the wine makers and the somms of today are trying to push kind of that you drink what you like, you drink what you want with what you like in terms of food. Pairings can matter for sure, but you can absolutely select a red wine with fish. Specifically, I think a great pairing with fish is Pinot Noir. And so if you want to have a white wine with a steak or a chicken, I'd suggest something like more buttery texture like Chardonnay, for example. And you'll typically find those kind of buttery Chardonnays in the California region, the Napa region especially. All right. Any other questions, Andrew, right now?
Nope, that's everything for now.
Okay, awesome. So back into the Zinfandel. So Bear Flag producer, his name's Aaron Potier. He is located in Sonoma, and he really wanted to put together a wine that was representative of the grape. And I think this is a great example of Zinfandel, what it can be. It's kind of got that region has kind of consistently like hot days and very, very cool nights. And that allows for this expression to really be beautiful. So as we put our nose in the glass, you notice some like dark fruits. We're talking about blackberries, almost like a blueberry pie. If you kind of open your mouth a little bit, as you're putting your nose in your glass, you're going to get a little bit more of those kind of profiles. But again, blackberries, blueberries, kind of like a really dark strawberry, overripe almost. There's a lot of cinnamon, nutmeg, vanilla, baking spices on this wine as well, and even some tobacco, right? There's some kind of like tertiary characteristics in wines. Sometimes you'll see, maybe not in this one, but a lot of cabs, Napa cabs, especially Rioja. That's a Spanish Tempranillo or Garnacha. They will have almost like a leathery kind of saddle strap type of aroma and profile, even on the palate. So go ahead and take a sip of this wine. And again, if you don't have a Sonoma Zinfandel, that's okay. You'll also see Zinfandel produced in Lodi, California, Paso Robles, and those places are a little bit warmer, so you're going to get even more alcohol in that wine. Typically we'll see around 14%, 15%, but it can go up to like 16 and a half in one of these wines. And one of the reasons why I chose this wine to introduce to you all today, maybe not to some, but to really kind of get our head out of the space of thinking that there's only white Zinfandel, and that there's not a red wine like this that can be enjoyed during the summer. When things potentially get back to some of the way that they were, this is a great wine to enjoy while grilling. When you grill your steaks, you have your burgers, you're doing your barbecue. It's a fantastic wine to sample during those types of times. And you can drink it on its own, or with a pairing. It's completely up to you. All right. But I'm gonna take another sip because it's delicious.
Another quick question for you, Dwight.
Yep.
Why are some bottles corked and others with a twist-off cap? What is this?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So some people don't realize that cork comes from a cork tree. Okay, and what this instrument does, it's porous. So when a bottle gets corked, it's still actually breathing, right? When we take a cork out, it speeds up the aging process. What this cork does, it allows the aging process to move slower. Okay, so you'll notice, you know, some of us, when we were younger, maybe or more less mature in the game, we used to just uncork our bottles and leave it on the kitchen counter, and then come back to it the next day, and it tastes completely different. And that's because you've now introduced more oxygen into this bottle, and you've allowed it to age faster than it actually should or wants to, because wine is living and breathing. All right, but what this cork does is slow down the aging process, and it allows for a limited level of oxygen to get into the bottle and age more gracefully. So that's cork. And screw tops, which is also called like a stelvin enclosure. You'll notice on a screw top that it's pretty easy to open, right? Even those stelvin closures allow for oxygen to get into that bottle, and that's why they called it. I think it was an engineer or scientist, Stelvin, who came up with a way to allow oxygen to still get in the bottle, even though it looks completely closed. And again, there's no real difference in terms of quality. There's really no difference in terms of price as it relates to screw tops and corked bottles. That's completely, you know, a myth. There are a lot of $100, $200 bottles that are on the screw top.
I have a few more questions, if you don't mind.
Please.
The next question is, why is rosé so much more popular in the summer and not a dark wine like a cab?
Yeah, I think rosé is popular for a number of reasons during the summer. One, because it's served cold, and people tend to heat up a little bit more when it comes to drinking like a more bold red wine. Rosé is typically served cold, and the way that rosé is made is interesting. People think that rosé sometimes is a wine or a grape of its own, and it's all the same, and it is not. Rosé can be made from any red grape, and there are over 1,300 varietals that exist, and by varietals I mean varieties of grapes in the world that have been discovered. And so any one of those that are red can be turned into a rosé. We know that when you squeeze a grape, right, a white or red grape, that the juice is always white or clear, all right? Except with the exception of Alicante Boucher, which actually has a red flesh, and it's more pinkish in terms of the juice that comes out. But every other grape has white juice. The way that you get rosé is by letting the skins of the grapes ferment in a tank with the grapes with juice. And so until it gets to a specific color, they'll let it macerate and ferment, and then they'll let the skins go. They'll remove the skins, and that's how you get your rosé. You can also make rosé by blending a white and a red grape together. Again, using minimal skin contact, but with the way that white wines are typically made, white wines, the skins are completely removed. If they're not removed, you get what's called the orange wine, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. That's pretty trendy over the past 3 years. But skins are removed, and then they're fermented with white wine. But to get this dark color here in a Zinfandel, for example, the skins are left on the grapes to ferment as long as possible. And that's how you get this deep kind of bold color. But yes, rosé is somewhere in between. Limited skin contact. It's popular during the summertime because it's served cold, it's refreshing, it's acidic. And the most typical offering of a rosé will be your Pinot Noir rosés, Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre, GSM from Provence, or X in France. Yeah.
Few more questions for you, Dwight. Thanks. What's the most underrated wine region and grape?
Um, I feel, it's subjective, but I feel right now Chile and their Cabernet Sauvignons are pretty underrated. Uruguay, South America in general, which is considered New World. South America has some amazing wines. Uruguay in their Tanat, they do a Pinot Noir rosé, which is amazing. I think that's an underrated region in terms of the North American region. I'd say Canada, the Okanagan Valley, the Willamette Valley in Oregon, the Finger Lakes region of New York State. They're putting out some great Rieslings. Viognier up there as well. Those would be my votes on this side. And I know there's more kind of like off the radar offerings in France, like the Jura as well, that are pretty popular and up and coming.
Thank you. Another question. There are many wine regions throughout the world. Do you have a hidden secret region for your favorite red and white wine? Also, do you have any favorite vintners in those locals?
Could you read the second part of that question again?
Yep. Also, do you have any favorite vintners in those local areas?
Gotcha. That's a good question. Do I have any secret go-to? I'm going to say the New York region, the Finger Lakes. Terrasson is a producer up there. I really like what's coming out. The Finger Lakes region in New York State. Trying to think of things that are maybe a little bit more abstract. Like I mentioned before, Uruguay in their Tanat, you're going to get a similar profile to Zinfandel. It's not as fruit forward. I wouldn't say it's a transitional wine if you're used to drinking sweet wine, but you do get these kind of profiles of blackberry, blueberry pie that come out, especially after you let it breathe for a little bit. Spain, that's not, certainly not underrated, but Rioja and their offerings in Garnacha, Priorat in Spain as well. It's just really good wines everywhere in the world, and it's just a matter of you being willing to explore. Don't go for the typical Cabernets and the Chardonnays all the time. And again, that's another reason why I wanted to bring these kind of grapes to your attention. Good question.
Another question for you. Do you treat after dinner wines like port or ice wines the same as dinner wines?
No, not me personally. I know some people that do, but after dinner wines are fortified wines, meaning they're going to be higher in alcohol content. Your glasses are going to be a lot smaller. Excuse me, a lot smaller, and they're not really meant for you to stick your nose in because it'll knock your socks off. You're talking about alcohol that's probably 25%, but those wines do last hundreds of years. So your ports, Madeiras, sherries, those types of after dinner wines are very popular, and they're stored and meant for aging, typically not being drunk young. And typically, you won't see a release less than 15 years as a current release for those types of wines. But no, I'm not a big after dinner wine fan in general, but I definitely have a couple bottles of Sauternes that I keep, maybe for a special occasion in the future.
Another question for you. Should a red wine be refrigerated after opening?
1000%, especially if you're not going to be drinking it the day after. And there's nothing that the refrigeration does but preserve it. So typically, refrigerated, a wine will stay in its, ideal form for maybe 5 to 7 days. And we're talking about a refrigerator that maybe 50 degrees, 45, 35, between 35 and 50 degrees. If you have a wine fridge, you can kind of, manipulate those temperatures. And a white wine, you can keep, 7 days, I'd say, in the fridge. If you don't keep a red wine in the fridge and you leave it out on the countertop, it's going to age a little bit quicker. But you want to drink it within probably 3 days, I'd say max 72 hours. And out of these, another fun fact, these bottles, 750 milliliters, typical bottle, they call the double of these a magnum. You'll get 5 glasses out of this one bottle of wine with about, 3 ounce, 3.5 ounce pours.
Got a few more questions for you, Dwight. They keep coming in.
Okay.
Next question is, are there any unsaid rules about wine on airplanes, or do you recommend people still get whichever kind they like, just like at home?
Yeah, I recommend that you get what you like. There's no rules, and certainly people like me who are getting into the industry and starting to study and learn more about this beverage are trying to break, every kind of stereotype that has existed around wine. I drink wine in a suit and tie, and I drink wine in a t-shirt and sweatpants, and I don't apologize for it in any way, shape, or form. So no, there are no specific kind of rules to drinking wine on an airplane or in a restaurant. You drink what you like, you drink what fits your budget and fits your flavor profile.
Thanks. Another question for you. What does viscosity say about the quality, if anything at all?
Typically nothing much about quality. Viscosity, we can use milk, for example. A high viscosity, more full-bodied wine is going to be your whole milk, whereas a lighter viscosity, lighter-bodied wine is going to be your skim milk, and then your 2% will be medium-bodied. And in between there, there's the som talk, medium plus, medium minus, and that kind of thing. But we're typically low, medium, high is how they kind of approach wines. And so, this is going to be a light-bodied wine, right? Lower viscosity, light to medium bodied, and this is going to be medium to full bodied, bolder red wine. Okay, but it doesn't really say much about quality, but viscosity.
Awesome. Dwight, do you have any more? Do you want to continue, and then we can proceed with questions a little bit later? I know I have a bunch, and we can always share your email or such at the end too if people have further questions. But I just wanted to get your.
No, let's get 2-3 more.
Okay. Let me find another one for you. How do you think these lesser-known countries, regions could better promote themselves? For example, Portugal.
What was that last part, Andrew?
Yep. The whole question is, how do you think these lesser-known countries / regions could better promote themselves? For example, Portugal.
Yeah, Portugal is an awesome place, and most people don't realize that port is grown in Portugal, and the grape that they use to make port is Touriga Nacional. Honestly, I think a lot of these countries that are under the radar and these regions that are under the radar are okay with it. They don't want to be mass produced, and they don't want to become that popular. They want to make a quality wine and send out cases and barrels that fit their budget and fit their vineyards. Not everyone has all the hectarage or acreage, as we kind of say here in the States, as a producer like Moet and Chandon or one of those bigger kind of house producers. So I think people are pretty comfortable, but they have to have there's a lot that goes to getting a wine from Europe or Australia into the United States market. Importers and distributors are all involved in that process, and there's a certain level of marketing, I'm sure, that those smaller producers or more unknown producers could do, but I think most are actually comfortable in their space. Good question, though.
All right, let me find another one for you. There's one about, this is kind of two questions put together. The first question was, any baby step books you can recommend for starters?
1000%. Yeah.
Or a favorite magazine you could subscribe to?
Sure. So there are a couple magazines in specific. This past year, I was actually gifted a subscription for Wine Enthusiast, which I love. So I'd highly recommend Wine Enthusiast. There's also Decanter and Wine Spectator that exist in the magazine level. This is a Christmas buy, a Hanukkah buy, a birthday buy, a just because buy. This book here will teach you anything and everything that you need to know in terms of buying and tasting wine and getting into wine. It's Wine Folly, made by Madeline Paquette, really awesome girl, super knowledgeable, won the James Beard Award, I think 2 years ago. Super down to earth, but knows her stuff. The illustrations here are amazing. Makes wine super palatable and approachable, easy to digest. So I highly recommend Wine Folly for a beginner. And then those of you who are a little bit more adept and experienced in the game, this is more of your encyclopedia, the Wine Bible. I was also gifted this. This was an amazing gift. And, anything and everything that you could know about wine is in here. And the Wine Atlas. And this is the World Atlas of Wine, actually by Hugh Johnson and Jancis Robinson. Jancis Robinson is one of the most world-renowned wine writers and critics. So definitely highly recommend those resources.
And then one more quick question for you, Dwight. There are a few other questions as well, and maybe we can share your email at the end so these people can kind of reach out to you and ask questions that weren't able to be answered tonight. But we somebody ask, where do you purchase your wine? I order some from vineyards and some online and some at our closed PA state stores, but suggestions for times like these when stores are limited.
Yeah, so my go-to is wine.com for purchasing cases of wine, I'd say. If you're just trying to buy one bottle of wine, I'd say go to your local liquor store or wine shop. But if you're looking to buy wine in more bulk, definitely go to wine.com, set up a case. And actually now a lot of wine shops are doing specials. So I support local as well. For cases, $99 for 12. And those are pretty quality wines, at some of the shops that are being, offering now, because, they're not getting the traffic that they're used to. So now is a good time to go out and support local business in that way. But wine.com, I found to be pretty reliable, and they get things to me pretty fast. So if I'm ordering 12, if I'm ordering 6, that's typically where I go. But it's not a bad idea to, order from vineyards a lot of times, or wineries. A lot of times you'll get charged a premium though, as it relates to shipping, especially if you're only ordering, 1 or 2 bottles. Typically those specials for free shipping don't kick in until around 6 or more. So just be mindful of that. One or two more questions, I'll wrap up.
Yep, I can do that. I had another, let's see. Normally one wouldn't mix and match drinks, but not so with wine. What makes wine different that allows for drinking different types in one sitting and not losing taste or getting intoxicated? Question.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think wine has a typical common denominator, and that is it's a grape, right? And the flavor profiles go with what you're eating and pairing it with. And so, to me, it's not like mixing white and dark liquor. The grape consistency, throughout, all the varietals make it a lot easier. And, I would say if you are, gonna go from white to rosé to red, actually, let me back up. Typically what we do is drink sparkling first, white second, rosé next, and then red. So there's a little grade. That would be my order, and I would pair food with each one of those specific wines that I'm drinking. So no, there's no hard and fast rules there. And I think the grapes and the profiles that kind of overlap in each one of the glasses of wine make it a lot easier to work with.
All right, and one more question for you, Dwight. This is kind of funny, but also kind of serious.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on Franzia? Is there any way to make it better? And what distinguishes cheap wines from more expensive ones?
Right. So yeah, Franzia, I wouldn't even use it in my pasta sauce, to be honest with you. They have a specific lane, and it's mass production. You'll see that at the college dorm room parties, but it's not really for the more serious kind of wine drinkers. And the differences in a cheaper wine and expensive wine is the actual winemaking process and the farming practices that take place. So those wines, the Barefoots, the Franzias, the Yellowtails, they're using pesticides and they're using grapes of all different types of qualities to put into those bottles. And that's typically why you won't see vintages, right, 2016, 2017, 2018 on those bottles, because they're just putting together a formula and throwing it in there and hoping, that you're going to buy it. Whereas, producers like this, La Cana and Bear Flag, they're taking their time. They're being more intentional of the process. They're using more natural winemaking skills. They're not using pesticides in a lot of their winemaking in their farming. And they're not highly mechanized, so people are actually in the winery doing the hard work, putting the labels on the bottles, corking the bottles, and that's the difference of a cheap wine versus a higher quality, more expensive wine. Okay.
Thanks, Dwight.
Sure. So just before we wrap up, I highly encourage you to go see Psalm 1, Psalm Into the Bottle. That's the second one, and then Psalm 3. Those are great movies, documentaries to kind of watch while you're drinking something, and it's highly educational. It's fun, it's light, and I think super practical. It actually features Madeline Paquette, who wrote Wine Folly, in at least three of those versions, three of those movies. And the next time, you go to a restaurant, don't be afraid to open up that wine list and do your research on the regions and the vintages. See what the weather was like in Spain in 2016. See what the weather was like in Napa in 2008. And that's, makes it a huge difference as to how you can kind of make a quality selection day in and day out as it relates to picking a quality bottle of wine. So please follow me on Instagram. I follow my wine journey, the Dapper Oenophile. You'll see, I started probably this page back in May of 2018. And, I'm on my path to getting my CSW, and, I taste on a regular basis. We'll just leave it at that. But I really love this beverage, and I'm happy to connect with any of you who've been here tonight over a glass or two. All right. Any other questions, Andrew?
We had a bunch, and I'll send them to you, Dwight.
Okay. All right, fair enough. Sounds good.
Thank you so much. And thank you everybody who was online tonight and participating. We really appreciate it.
Be good. Be blessed, everybody. Stay safe.
Mm-hmm.